In the 20th century, economics lost its purpose and started chasing the false goal of GDP growth. In recent decades, that has pushed many societies into deepening inequality, and it's pushing us all towards ecological collapse. This century calls for a new goal, meeting the needs of all within the means of the planet. In other words, it's time to get into the donut, the sweet spot for humanity. But that's no easy task. Today, billions of people still fall short of their daily needs, from food, housing and energy to healthcare and education. And yet collectively, we've already overshot our pressure on some of Earth's most critical life support systems, driving climate change and the breakdown of biodiversity. What we do to this Earth in the next 50 years will shape the next 10,000. So let's replace that last century goal of endless growth with the goal of thriving in balance. And if we're to have half a chance of getting there, what economic mindset would be fit for the task? In April 1947, in a little Swiss village, a small band of economists met with plans to rewrite the global economic story, and they called it neoliberalism. Their method was ingenious. They described each economic actor with a set of such powerful traits that the rest of the script almost wrote itself. In the 1980s, when their laissez-faire story was finally put on the international stage, the plot was loaded from the very start. And so for the last 40 years, we've been told that the market is efficient, so give it free rein. That the state is incompetent, so don't let it meddle. That trade is win-win, so open your borders. That the commons are tragic, so sell them off. That society, well, there's no such thing, so ignore it. And that the household is domestic, so leave it to the women. With such a cast list, the triumph of the market seemed almost inevitable, and it's been driving us into social and ecological crisis. But we were also told that finance is infallible, and that was so clearly disproven in the global financial crash that it's called the rest of the story into question too. It's time to ditch this outdated neoliberal script. We need a new economic story that's fit for the 21st century, one that puts the economy in service to life. So how should that story begin? Who does economics tell us we are? To make humanity fit into their theories, last century's economists invented rational economic man. He stands alone, with money in his hand, a calculator in his head, ego in his heart, and nature at his feet. He hates work, loves luxury, has insatiable wants, and knows the price of everything. But the trouble is this. On being told that he is like us, we actually become more like him. Researchers have discovered that the more that economic students study this Homo economicus, the more self-interested they become. Rational economic man is damaging our societies and the living world. We can no longer afford to gaze at his image, which is why it's time for a new portrait of humanity at the heart of economics. One which recognises that our brains are wired for empathy, cooperation and mutual aid. That instead of being fixed, our wants change as and when our values do. And far from being dominant over nature, we're deeply dependent upon her. With these new beginnings of a self-portrait, how can economics start to nurture human nature and give us a far greater chance of thriving in the 21st century? In the 19th century, a determined bunch of economists wanted to make economics a science as reputable as physics. So, inspired by Newton's laws of motion that so accurately describe the movement of planets, they searched for economic laws that could describe the movement of markets. But by trying to turn their theories into maths, they ended up with models based on equilibrium. Models that had little capacity to predict, let alone respond to, real-world boom and bust. No wonder hardly anyone saw the crash coming. It's time to ditch the physics envy and embrace economic complexity with its spiralling feedbacks, emergent trends, and surprise tipping points. Through this systems thinking lens, we can start to understand our ever-evolving world, from the rise of the 1% to the collapse of ecosystems. And that's why 21st century economists won't think of themselves as engineers controlling the levers of the economy, but as gardeners, tending to and shaping the economy as it evolves. So let's take off the hard hat and put on some gardening gloves. It's time to get savvy with systems. And the question is this: how should that economic garden be designed? No pain, no gain. It's an economic myth that has been repeated in countries around the world. That if people put up with increasing inequality, it will be better for us all in the end, because the benefits of growth will eventually trickle down. Except they don't. In many of the world's richest countries, the gap between rich and poor is at its highest in 30 years. And it's widening in China, India, and South Africa too. Far from being a necessary phase in every nation's progress, rising inequality is a policy choice, and a bad one at that. It's actually a failure of economic design, and it harms us all. So don't wait for economic growth to even things up, because it may never happen. Economies that are divisive by default must become distributive by design. That means going beyond redistributing income to redistributing wealth too, especially the wealth that comes from controlling land, controlling money creation, controlling business, technology, and ideas. This century, we have the chance to embed distributive design at the heart of our economies, if we choose to make it happen. For 200 years, industrial activity has been based on degenerative design. We take Earth's materials, make them into stuff we want, use it for a while, and then toss it away. Take, make, use, lose. It's a one-way system that runs counter to the living world, and it's devouring the sources of its own sustenance. Economic theory has told us not to worry, that more growth is needed so that nations can afford to clean things up. But at the global scale, that's simply not true. And the effects are destroying Earth's life support systems on which we all fundamentally depend. We can't wait for growth to clean things up because it won't. We need to turn today's economies, which are degenerative by default, into ones that are regenerative by design. Ones that run on renewable energy, that turn waste from one process into food for the next, so that things are never used up, but are used again and again. And in all this, the 21st century economist's role is a crucial one: to harness the potential of business and finance, of the commons and the state, and of human nature, to unleash this regenerative future. In the 20th century, GDP growth turned into the overriding target of economic policy. So much so that governments, businesses, and financial markets came to expect, demand, and depend upon it never ending, even in the world's richest countries. Politicians promising a better future offer green growth, inclusive growth, smart, resilient, or balanced growth. Pick any future you want, so long as you pick growth. And so, we have economies that need to grow, whether or not they make us thrive. While what we need are economies that make us thrive whether or not they grow. Economies that are designed to be far more distributive of value created and regenerative, working with, not against, the cycles of the living world. Economies in which GDP, simply the cost of all things sold in the market, may vary, sometimes up, sometimes down, in response to making that transformation. So, what would it take to make this possible? Economics means household management, and the question of how a household should manage its resources is more relevant today than ever. In ancient Greece, when the philosopher Xenophon first coined the term economics, he was literally thinking about the affairs of a single household. But towards the end of his life, he applied the question more widely, to the management of his hometown, the city-state of Athens. 2,000 years later, in Scotland, Adam Smith looked to the next level up, the management of the nation as a household, asking what makes the economy of one country thrive while another stagnates. And this question has held sway for the past 200 years. So economic thinking has gone from the household to the city-state to the nation-state. It's time to take the inevitable next step. Ours is the era of the planetary household. And this century, we need some pretty insightful managers to guide our planetary household, ones who are ready to pay attention to the needs of all its inhabitants. Let's get to work.